drinking green apple burnett's. There was hookah, and then I have no recollection of the rest of that night. What I do remember is waking up around 5 a.m. in the hospital. There is no memory of it anywhere inside my body. That's unsettling that you can just lose pieces of yourself like that. Hi. Don't do this often or ever really. Long form content has never been my niche, but I had quite a few requests to share my story when it comes to my sobriety, my drinking journey, really, as quick as it was. Oh, I'm nervous. It was a big part of my life for, the first years of sobriety and recovery. And I did write about it a lot. I shared about it a lot. And then as life moved on, it just kind of became normal and part of who I am. Okay, I need to regroup. I guess starting at the beginning makes the most sense. I've shared before, I am a person who struggles with anxiety, depression in my past for sure. I have always been that way. I've always felt like I just didn't quite fit in the same ways that other people did at times. Even when I was involved with things, I always kind of felt like I was on the outside, or I had this extra added layer of anxiety, wondering, what people thought of me, how I fit in. Wow, I can be interviewed on live TV and do better than this. Anyway. When I tell people that I have not had a drink since 2013, when I was 20 years old, I think they often assume that I had a long history with alcohol previous to that, and that is not the case for me. I was a very straight-laced, goody two-shoes all the way through high school. 4.0 GPA, athlete. I never touched alcohol. I knew that once I got to college, I wasn't adamantly against it by any means. I didn't have a burning desire to try it either. I just always stayed away from it. I had been an athlete my entire life. I played soccer for 14 years. And when college came around, I knew that I would not be committing that type of time to playing a sport. I probably was not talented enough to play college soccer, even if I wanted to. And I had a friend from high school who played rugby. And I did not know much about rugby at the time. All I knew was that I was an aggressive soccer player, and I got to be aggressive in rugby instead of getting carded for it, and it sounded like a good time. And so I went to the first few practices, and I was just hooked. I loved the people, I loved the atmosphere, I loved the sport, really. And I always like to preface this by saying it wasn't rugby's fault, it wasn't the people's fault, it wasn't anything like that, but for me, that was my door. That was what opened my world to alcohol. I know now that rugby is a very drinking-centric sport. I did not know that at the time. So for me, what I was entering into was just college. I went from, never really being around alcohol or drinking at all to a lot of drinking. It felt normalized. It felt like it was just what people did on the weekends. And so I jumped into that pretty quickly. The very first time that we all got together as a team after a game, I think I had 2 beers, and I remember the feeling hitting me, just this slight buzz, and I remember loving it. I loved that it let my guard down. I felt like I could talk to anybody. I wasn't so self-aware. I had spent so much of my life being so self-aware. In a way, it was detrimental. I just wanted to be one of those people who could talk to people easily. For me, alcohol lowered my inhibitions enough to be able to do that. So, it started innocently enough. It was weekends for the most part. I had, rules in place I tried to abide by. Regardless of that, I found myself often just wondering when I could have another drink, when it would be acceptable, how much I could have to drink that time. It was always I was pushing the envelope a little further each time. I don't remember when. I want to say it was around Halloween was the first time I ever blacked out. I had gone to a friend's dorm and done shots, and I was just tanked before we even got to the party. I remember vaguely laying on the couch and just puking into a garbage can while everything went on around me and feeling so sick, disappointed in myself and so sick, and swearing I was not going to do it again. And guess what? The next weekend, I was right back there. It quickly got to the point where people knew that they would probably be taking care of me if I was drinking, which was often. I never just had a drink. I was always drinking to get obliterated, honestly. And so that's how a good chunk of freshman year went. It wasn't anything crazy or super serious immediately. It was just college. And as time went on, it became more obvious that there were times that alcohol was impacting the decisions that I was making, and as a result was affecting my relationships, my friendships. I was often waking up and having to do damage control the next day, having to look through my phone and see who I called, who I texted, what I had said, what I needed to apologize for, feeling more and more hungover as time went on. It got to the point towards the end of freshman year where my drinking was just becoming more frequent. Maybe Thursday was basically the weekend, so I could drink. Other people were drinking, so I could drink. It wasn't a big deal to have, a drink before going to night class, those types of things where I found myself just changing my parameters and justifying a lot. But all things considered, freshman year came and went without any major issues, essentially, apart from internally. I know some people were worried about me from the outside. It was never really super broached in terms of this could be a problem, apart from my freshman year roommate who had obviously kind of seen the brunt of it. And it was something that I just kind of had the conversation, acknowledged, and got back to doing what I was doing. Yeah, so time came to pack up and I went home, and long story short, I found every essentially reason I could to drink that summer, or people I could drink with, places I could stay where I could drink. It wasn't nearly as frequent as it was during the school year, but it still, was something that was constantly on my mind. And I could not wait to go back to school sophomore year. I couldn't wait to get back to my people and the atmosphere and rugby and practice and being able to just kind of fall back into that same pattern. Moved back in for sophomore year, and I got back into it immediately and hit it hard. And right off the bat, things were just not good. I had fights with some of my best friends. I would wake up with injuries and I didn't know where they came from. I would wake up in a stranger's bed and have no idea what happened. And to this day, I still don't know what happened at some points. And that's really scary when you think about it, to just completely lose nights of your life. This continued. It continued, and it started taking a toll on me physically. The person I was, what I looked like, what I saw in the mirror sophomore year was completely different than the person I'd been a year before that. Gained weight. I had this just yellowish color to my skin all the time. I was puffy, covered in bruises, whether from drinking or from rugby. Just was not in a healthy space. I knew that, but I didn't care enough to stop drinking. It became more and more frequent that I would drink, before a night class, eventually before an afternoon class. It got to the point where on occasion I was sneaking alcohol from my roommates and filling their bottles back up with partial water. Keep in mind, I wasn't even 21 during all of this. I couldn't just go buy alcohol. It got to the point where, I was super hungover when I woke up, so I would have a drink in the morning once in a while. I would have these interactions and talk to teachers and talk to classmates and think that I was so sneaky. And I'm sure, in retrospect, that it was obvious. I remember I had one professor specifically who had me in a class freshman year and then had me in a class that second semester, or might have been the first semester of sophomore year, and approached me and said, you were so engaged and inquisitive and involved at the beginning of the year. What happened? It just made me mad more than anything. I didn't know what happened. I didn't feel like anything had changed that drastically. Time went on. There were a number of, incidents during sophomore year where I was injured enough to need medical attention, need stitches in my knee, woke up in a place I didn't recognize, didn't have my purse, didn't have my phone, never found them. These things just became common occurrences and something that I would almost wake up and just laugh about. I remember one morning waking up so hungover before class and just puking everywhere on the quad lawn, feeling embarrassed and I knew that wasn't normal, but still it wasn't enough to make me change. The end of sophomore year came around. My parents had concerns this whole time. They knew I was drinking. They had talked to me about it, but they were, trying to give me the benefit of the doubt, trying to, give me that space to be an adult. In retrospect, I think they maybe wish they had handled things differently or stepped in sooner. It came to a brink one night towards the end of sophomore year. My roommates and I were drinking. I had given my roommate a bottle to take a drink out of, somehow kind of like hit the bottle and she ended up chipping her tooth. And I had grown up with this person. We had been, best friends our whole life. Essentially, her mom ended up talking to my mom about it. My parents were upset. I mean, this had been, a culmination of things. She and I, our friendship was hanging on by a thread. There had been numerous things that I had done or said while drinking that had taken a toll. To this day, losing that friendship is one of the hardest things that I've had to come to terms with. And it's not that it's lost, but it's changed. It's different. It's not what it was. And I don't know that I will ever have a friend like that again. Yeah. So after that, my parents had said, you are not studying abroad this coming fall if anything else happens. And I had my heart set on going to Chile. Like, I was so excited for it. I was minoring in Spanish, was just pumped. I really tried to rein it in. I remember like the last big rugby hurrah of the year, I was so proud of myself because I didn't black out. I had, the drinks that I said I was gonna have and remembered the night, and that was like this big celebration, this big accomplishment. I was so sure that that was it, and I was going home for the summer. And that was the last night out, so I was good. I was golden. And then the next night happened. We weren't going to go out, and then, as it does, something popped up and roommates and I decided to go out. I remember going to a house. I remember drinking green apple burnett's, and there was hookah, and then I have no recollection of the rest of that night. What I do remember is waking up around 5 a.m. in the hospital with my parents in the room, really, having been woken up in the middle of the night. I had no recollection of what happened. I just knew that I was in deep shit. I was still incredibly drunk. Eventually kind of pieced together, we had gone to the bar. Somehow I got into the bar, even though I was not 21, drinking, lost all of my stuff. I insisted that I wanted to walk home by myself and would not let anybody accompany me, so I left. Was stumbling down the street and was found by law enforcement. This is still hard to talk about because it's just it's like it was another person. Like there is no memory of it anywhere inside my body, no matter how many times I've gone back. It's unsettling that you can just lose pieces of yourself like that. When they brought me to the hospital, I blew a 0.34. The legal limit is 0.08. Essentially slept it off. I didn't need my stomach pumped. I hadn't lost consciousness. It spoke to how much I had been drinking. The fact that I could function like that. Eventually, fell asleep. Woke up. Obviously, in the interim, all my parents had been called and come to the hospital. Vague recollections of talking to the doctor, being a total jerk because I was still drunk when I was discharged. Her telling my parents, this is not normal. She needs help. It can't keep going this way, essentially. I spent most of that day completely hungover at home with my parents, thinking that this was all just gonna blow over and be good, and I would be able to get back to my life. And meanwhile, my mom was already making calls to treatment facilities. I really didn't think that that was going to be how it played out. But I went along with it because I wanted to just, check the boxes off, and the sooner I could do that, the sooner I could get back to my life. And I had no intention of cutting alcohol out of my life. I had, an evaluation done. It was recommended that I be put into an outpatient treatment program. And so I entered a youth program at Hazelden Betty Ford in Minnesota, and I started going. I was so angry the first few weeks. I remember getting home and telling my mom that it was all people who had drug problems and that I didn't relate to them and that wasn't my problem, so why was I there? My problem was alcohol. It was different. I could control it. Really, I refused to participate. I wouldn't talk in group. I wouldn't talk to my counselors. I wouldn't admit that I potentially had an issue. And as those first few weeks passed, I began feeling better physically, emotionally, mentally. Like my life just began improving alcohol was out of the equation. I knew that on some level, but I also didn't want to admit it. I didn't necessarily want that to be the case. This entire time I felt like I was like hiding this big thing from the people in my life, and I've always been a person who kind of wears my heart on my sleeve and puts my struggles out there and tries to make sense of them through writing. And it came to a point where I was like, you know what, I am just going to put this out there on Facebook. I am going to say that this is what happened, this is where I'm at, and this is what I'm doing. And I was so scared to do that. I was so afraid people were going to judge me and make assumptions. But I did it, and I was just met with an outpouring of love and support. And still every year when that pops up on my Facebook, I'm just hit with like a flood of emotions because I remember what it was like being in that moment. You know, and that was really a turning point for me. And it was, you know, a while after that I read a quote that said, "An alcoholic is anyone whose life gets better when they stop drinking." And that was what did it for me. Today, you know, I don't use the term alcoholic for various reasons, but at that point I had been trying to justify and find ways around and find reasons that, you know, I didn't have an issue with alcohol or it wasn't as bad as other people. But at the end of the day, when alcohol was removed from the equation, my life got better in so many ways. From that point on, I decided to embrace it, and I spent time feeling guilty because for me that decision became an easy one. I didn't face a lot of temptation or missing drinking. I just threw myself into recovery and sobriety and navigating that world and making connections, and, you know, very similarly to what I did when Cooper was first diagnosed with hearing loss. I wanted to make a difference for people going through it, and I wanted to connect. 8 weeks passed and I graduated from that program, having not had a drink since the night of, ending up in the hospital. That was May of 2013, so I graduated from that program in July of 2013. I was very, you know, my parents were back and forth on whether I would study abroad or not, whether it would be a really good thing or a terrible thing. Eventually it was kind of decided that I would go. It would be good for me to be away and really get some time under my belt. In August, I left for Chile for 5 months, and it was the best decision I could have made and that my parents could have allowed for me at that point. Gave me perspective, gave me the opportunity to kind of be away from the places that might have been triggers or might have been tempting for me to jump back into. I was so just amazed by this new place and language, and so immersed in all of that I didn't even have time to miss drinking. Like I said, times I felt guilty. I felt like I wasn't like a good enough alcoholic, a good enough, you know, person that struggled with drinking, because my rock bottom wasn't the same as many other people's. I didn't drink as long. You know, in times since, I've come to realize that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how long I drank. It doesn't matter how low I sank, because at the end of the day, alcohol made me into a person that I didn't want to be, that I didn't like, that I didn't feel proud of. And the bottom line was that when it was removed from my life, I started regaining those things that I had lost. I started being able to repair most relationships and friendships and make those amends to an extent. I was involved in 12-step work for the first few years, and I do, you know, credit that for giving me a community and a lifeline at that point. A few years into sobriety, I realized that it really wasn't a fit for me anymore. I had connected with this amazing, just like wide network of women online who were walking the same journey. And I felt so much support and connection there, and in doing this advocacy work and writing and being a resource. And it was just so fulfilling to me, the same way that, you know, 12-step work is for people. And so I stepped away at that point. I'm lucky that I've never been tempted really to drink. I've never wanted to turn to it in times of anxiety or sadness, because I know in my gut that it would make things so much worse. I am so lucky that the people in my life are supportive and that they think about me in situations like that they go out of their way to say, like, hey, is there a kind of mocktail you want? Like, are you okay if I drink this? And at the end of the day, like, that means so much to me. Even 10 plus years in, I still have friends that do that. I'm 100% fine being around alcohol. My husband drinks. It doesn't bother me a bit. And there's obviously times I wonder, like, could I handle it now? I'm in such a different space in my life. I'm in such a different atmosphere. Like, would it be okay? Would I be able to have one drink, two drinks? And I think at the end of the day, I just don't care enough to find out. My life is so full and good, and I have Brandon, I have Cooper, I have my entire family, my siblings that have watched this entire journey unfold, and I have no desire to return to the person I was for those few years. My journey might look different than a lot of people's, but it also might look similar, and that's why I like sharing. College is, where it starts for a lot of people, and it's hard to get sober, and it's really hard to get sober young. I have actually started saying like alcohol free more often because, I'm fine with the occasional CBD or THC drink or whatever. Like, that's just not an issue for me. And I know that some people will disagree with that, and that's fine. I strongly believe that everybody defines their own recovery. What works for one person is not going to work for another person. And at the end of the day, this life that I have is not something that I want to risk just to have a drink. It's been good for me to have like the space away from that being such a big part of my identity for a while. Obviously, I've thrown myself into other avenues, but I think I often forget how helpful it can be for me to talk about this aspect of my life. Not even just for myself, but for other people who are in a similar position, are feeling alone, are wondering how to do it, essentially, and if it's possible. And it is.